السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أهلا بكم إلى هذه الحلقة من برنامج من الداخل عبر قناة الميادين. معكم زينب الصفار. لعل مقدمات البرامج والأخبار ستبقى متأثرة بفيروس كورونا لوقت ليس بالقليل. الآن انتشر الفيروس في كل بلد تقريبا، وتخطى عدد الإصابات 1,000,000 حالة، وقد يكون العدد أكبر بكثير. إثر ذلك انهارت الاقتصادات وانعطبت أنظمة الرعاية الصحية، وفي حين أضخمت المستشفيات باتت الأماكن العامة خالية من الناس الذين انقطعوا عن أعمالهم وأصدقائهم وحتى عن أهلهم من كبار السن. هذه الجائحة عطلت المجتمع الحديث على نطاق لم يشهده معظم الأحياء، ولعل هذا الوباء سيلقي بظلاله القاتمة قطعا على نفسية الأمة. بحسب الخبراء سيستغرق تطوير لقاح مثبت من 12 شهرا إلى 18 شهرا، ثم يستغرق وقتا أطول في صنعه وشحنه وحقنه في أذرع الأشخاص. من المحتمل إذن أن يبقى الفيروس جزءا لصيقا من الحياة على وجه البسيطة لمدة عام على الأقل، إن لم يكن لفترة أطول. إذا نجحت الجولة الحالية من تدابير الإبعاد الاجتماعي، فقد ينحسر الوباء بشكل كاف لكي تعود الأشياء إلى ما يشبه الحياة الطبيعية. يمكن أن تعج الطرقات بالمارة وتزدحم المطاعم، يمكن إعادة فتح المدارس، ويمكن لم شمل الأصدقاء. ولكن مع عودة الوضع الراهن سيعود الفيروس أيضا. هذا لا يعني أن المجتمع يجب أن يواصل الإغلاق المستمر، ولكن نحن بحاجة إلى الاستعداد للقيام بعدة فترات من الإبعاد الاجتماعي، كما يقول ستيفن كيسلر من جامعة هارفارد. البروفيسور محمد مرندي أستاذ الاستشراق في جامعة طهران يشرح كيف تتعامل إيران مع هذا الواقع تحت وطأة عقوبات أمريكية ظالمة غير إنسانية وجديدة في زمن الكورونا، وأين يرى النور والسكينة في ظل كل هذه الضوضاء الاقتصادية والصحية والسياسية. سيد محمد مرندي, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran and leading political commentator. Welcome to Mina Dakhel from the Inside, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Pure pleasure to have you, sir. Well, Dr. Marandi, experts believe that a global pandemic of this scale was inevitable. Hypotheticals became reality. The what if became now what. A grand fact, it will take between 12 to 18 months to develop a proven vaccine, and then longer still to make it, to ship it, to inject it into people's arms if this matter was not politicized. Are the Iranians ready or prepared perhaps to do multiple periods of social distancing?
I think the Iranians have actually shown themselves to be far more prepared than the Europeans and the Americans. Remember, the virus hit Iran before it hit the Europeans or hit it when it hit North America, and of course, as far as we know. But in Iran, there was a serious outbreak, and initially, the Western media, Western governments were often gloating about it. They were ridiculing Iran and Iran's response. But it turned out that after time, the Iranians were able to contain it, both through policies of social distancing and social awareness, as well as other policies that were carried out by the government, active screening. We have to remember that the Iranians have a very important, very effective, world-class primary health care network. Mm-hmm. And this primary health care network was created in the 1980s and the 1990s. So it goes from it exists in all the villages, in small cities, and all the major cities. And this has been a huge help in assisting in the fight against the virus, because through this network, active screening has taken place, and over 70 million people, both through online communication as well as through phones and contacts, are in constant contact with community healthcare experts, as well as volunteers from the Basij, or the equivalent of the Hashad in Iran. So now when we look at what's going on in Europe and the United States, and the catastrophic situation that we're seeing in Italy, in Spain, and in the United States, as well as in other Western countries, I think that it's become clear that Iran's done quite well. And we have to keep this in mind, that the Iranians had their hands tied behind their back because of the sanctions.
We will come to talk more about the issue of the sanctions and how this is negatively affecting Iran and the Iranians at the time of Corona. But allow me to ask you here, sir, the medical advice has been locked down until the virus begins to subside. But that advice encompassed to the possibility of COVID-19 returning later in the year, they say, in a phase 2, thus requiring further personal and social distancing. Could the Iranian economy sustain such a prospect? Might not a long shutdown inflict permanent damage? I mean, would there even be any economy left to resurrect in the wake of peak coronavirus?
Well, this is another area in which the Iranians face extra challenges. Because of the sanctions, the economic situation has been very difficult for the last few years. Both the sanctions under Obama and then the renewal of those sanctions by Trump. Trump is trying desperately to wreck the Iranian economy, to prevent Iran from importing and exporting and even importing medicine and supplies, as we saw during this corona crisis. So since the economic situation for ordinary Iranians is more difficult than before, it is very difficult for the government to convince people that they have to stay at home, because many people who don't have savings and who have to work just to sustain themselves and to keep food on the table, they can't stay indoors for long. So the Iranians are trying to find a mechanism where there's a balancing act, where on the one hand, social distancing remains enforced, but on the other hand, too much pressure isn't imposed on those who are more disenfranchised. Of course, the government is also giving financial support to those who've lost their jobs, those who are in economic difficult situations, but
sure,
it's going to be very difficult.
Now, here at this particular point, can you please explain the circumstances why Tehran decided to apply for a $5 billion International Monetary Fund loan for the first time since the Islamic Revolution in 1979?
Well, first of all, Iran is a member of the IMF and it pays its dues. It's not as if Iran is asking for favors. Iran has been a member, Iran has been paying its share for decades, and Iran hasn't been receiving any benefits from this organization because of the United States. So for over 40 years, Iran has never received a loan. However, since the IMF said that it's going to give loans to different countries that are facing the coronavirus as a national priority, the Iranians said that we want to have a loan as well. But of course, we knew from the very beginning that the Americans were not going to allow this. So on the one hand, the Iranians did apply, but the Iranians knew that the Americans would block it. But the Iranians wanted to make this public knowledge that the Americans are waging war against Iran. The Americans are using the coronavirus as a weapon through the sanctions in order to hurt Iranians. Iran actually has more than $5 billion right now stuck in different bank accounts across the world. Iran has millions of dollars in Korean banks, millions of dollars in the equivalent of millions of dollars in Japanese banks and in European banks, but they're all being blocked by these governments under direct orders from Trump himself.
And even today, at the time of Corona, allow me to stop you now, Dr. مرندي. We're going to have a short break, and then afterwards, we will continue to talk about Iran, the coronavirus, sanctions, and politics, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود. لا تذهبوا بعيدا. Leading political commentator Sayyid محمد مرندي, Professor of English Literature and Orientalism. Welcome back to من الداخل from the inside, sir.
Thank you.
Well, despite crises at home, whether in the US and the UK, and you were talking about this in full before the break, their tax money is generously used to dishonestly claim coronavirus is under control in both countries and that Iran is collapsing under COVID-19. How far is that true, and what does Iran urgently need today in form of aid?
No, obviously, Iran is not collapsing. In fact, I would say that, ironically, because of the sanctions, Iran is actually doing much better than other countries in the world. Iran has been disconnected from the global economic network, from the banking system, and Iran has difficulty exporting. Iran doesn't have many tourists as a result of the pressure that the United States has been putting on the country. So those countries that have lost their tourists, like Turkey, countries whose oil is not selling right now, like Saudi Arabia, they're the ones who are in deep trouble. Western countries whose economies are now in major crisis, not just because of the virus. The virus actually is like a pin that has popped the economic bubble that has been a major threat, and that was ultimately going to burst in the West. So it's led to a major economic crisis that may lead to a global depression. Whereas since Iran has not been able to export oil, since Iran has not been able to export goods, and since it doesn't have a thriving tourism industry, Iran is one of the few countries that is not affected economically by the virus. The virus itself, of course, is horrific, but again, the Iranians have been effective in dealing it through their very good primary healthcare network. So I think actually, for whatever reason, this is going to tilt the balance of power away from the United States and away from its allies in the region. And what the Americans have done is that since they've isolated Iran economically, they've protected Iran in a way from this wave of economic turbulence that we're now seeing. The Iranians do have major needs. If anyone goes to the foreign minister's Twitter account, he has provided a list of things that the Iranians do need and that they have difficulty purchasing because of the sanctions. Right. But still, the Iranians now are much better prepared than they were a few weeks ago.
Yes, and this is clearly manifested that even with the cruel sanctions and the imposition of more inhumane additional ones during this corona ordeal, yet there are no shortages of basic items on shelves, despite of reports saying otherwise. We also saw, Dr. مرندي, various heartwarming initiatives, like, for example, volunteers sanitizing ATM machines, landlords waiving 2 months of shop rent for their tenants, a campaign to help the people who have been destroyed by the economic crash, the dancing medical staff and singers in the hospitals trying to keep everyone's morale high, an increasing number of social volunteers, notably recently 2 young, beautiful ladies volunteering to wash the corpses of those who die infected by the coronavirus. How can you reflect, sir, on this kind of spirit, this revolutionary altruism, how it is important to focus on the positive ways Iranians are helping each other?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with Iran's religious culture, where it is both forward-looking and optimistic about the future, but it looks back as well to the Prophet. And so the sort of resilience that the Islamic history teaches us, on the one hand, is a strong element in increasing the resilience of the population. And on the other hand, this forward-looking ideology that is very predominant in Iran prevents people from, I think, becoming depressed and
Right.
too worried about the situation. And we've had, as you rightly pointed out, a large number of young Iranians especially that have been doing volunteer work and cooperating with the Ministry of Health or with the armed forces. And they've been active on all fronts, ordinary people, school teachers, right now. And also another thing is that because of the sanctions, Iran has been forced to, over the last few years, to move towards what it calls a resistance economy. And therefore, it's been becoming more and more capable of producing its own needs. And that's why let's say, the infrastructure existed so that when the Iranians were prevented from purchasing masks, when they were prevented from purchasing kits, and prevented from purchasing other medical supplies, they quickly began producing them in Iran.
Right.
So now Iran no longer needs to import these goods, and I think soon Iran will be exporting them to neighboring countries to help them out in their own coming troubles.
Hopefully soon. In some Western countries, Dr. مرندي, they are sentencing old people who get infected by coronavirus to death. Those same countries who constantly attack others, Iran among them, on the basis of breaching human rights. Today, in time of COVID-19, they don't recognize the least of these rights towards their own citizens, people who have sacrificed dearly. Yet Iran, under cruel sanctions, performed better than those liberal capitalist regimes.
Well, I think that's the nature of liberal capitalism. It advocates a selfish, a culture of selfishness among people and the accumulation of wealth. So basically, the United States, even the bailout that it put forward after the economic crisis and the corona crisis kicked in, it basically is going to transfer trillions of dollars from the poor to the rich. Whereas in Iran, for example, the government, its focus is on helping those who are disenfranchised, those who are in need of help from the state. So since, in a liberal capitalist society, the elites are in charge and they are priority and they're the ones who are accumulating wealth and power, basically they've used the coronavirus in the United States in particular to strengthen their own hands.
And in Europe too,
at the expense of the rest of society. Europe has a similar problem, but not to the degree that which we see in the United States. But it is very interesting that these European countries and the Americans, which have created this image across the world of their cultural superiority, of their economic superiority, of their political superiority, of their civilizational superiority, are unable to sustain their societies under these circumstances. Their economies have crashed. They are not taking care of their people, and we do not see the sort of activism that we see in our societies, where young people are coming and helping out in these numbers, in these large numbers. We don't see that in their societies. Why?
Right.
Because it's an individualistic society. People are taught to be selfish. People are taught to look out for themselves. So it's sort of the other extreme of communism, where they negate the individual. In capitalism and liberal capitalism, they negate society to a large degree. And when you move to these two extremes, the results are not very pretty ultimately.
Are devastating. There is a wave of anti-Iran Western media propaganda, like, for example, the satellite imagery of coronavirus burial pits in Qom. In addition to the banning of many social media accounts and blocking them on various platforms, I believe that your account is one of them. What are they so worried about during these times?
Yes, they've dismantled my Facebook account, and even though I'm not very active, and as well as my Instagram account, which I don't use all that much either, And this is, of course, just one small example. Many of my students have had their accounts blocked, many professors. It's an ongoing process where they constantly are dismantling accounts because they want to keep our side of the argument quiet. They don't want to hear our responses. All of the Iranian channels, all channels, whether they're Persian, even Persian channels that are on set, they're all banned. So you cannot watch Iranian channels in the United States, and in the individuals, as I said, their accounts are constantly blocked. So on the one hand, Western society or Western governments, they impose sanctions. They use the virus effectively as a weapon through sanctions. They make us voiceless as much as possible. And another thing that they do is that they use a host of Persian language TV channels against Iran.
Like BBC Persian,
VOA
yes,
Persian,
true.
Deutsche Welle Persian, Iran International, which is Saudi. These channels are extraordinarily hostile towards Iran. Day and night, they carry out psychological warfare against Iranians on behalf of their governments, that Iran is falling apart. They spread misinformation. They show video clips that are not authentic, that are discredited later on. But they're constantly trying to spread fear in the country. In contrast to the English BBC, for example, service, which is trying to keep the British society calm, the objective is to impose sanctions on Iran, make Iranians fearful, and ultimately silence the Iranians by silencing the Iranian media. It's extraordinary what Western countries do. And by the way, the Persian language media funded by Western governments and funded by Saudi Arabia are very, very hostile towards Arabs. They're constantly trying to tell Iranians that Arabs are bad, that the Chinese are bad, that the Russians are bad. It's
trying to drive a wedge between the Arabs and the Iranians more and more further. I believe we have run out of time, Dr. مرندي. I have lots of other questions I would like to ask you about. Unfortunately, leading Iranian political commentator محمد مرندي, professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Many thanks indeed for your insights, sir.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Always welcome, sir. والشكر لكم مشاهدينا على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا من كل فريق عمل البرنامج من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.